Chapter 3, Cells. All organisms are composed of cells. The cell is the smallest unit of life that can function independently. These cells can be very large or they can be very small. The largest cells would be things like an ostrich egg. An egg is a single cell. Here's frog eggs, plant cells, bacterial cells. These are micrometers. Viruses, and very small molecules. Cells, a lot of them fall into the range of the light microscope, which you will learn about in lab. Why are cells so small? Well, it has to do with what is called surface to volume ratio. All right? Understand that for a cell to live, things will diffuse into the cell and things will diffuse out of the cell. All right? So when you have a very small cell, like here, we have a 1 centimeter square block, a 2 centimeter square block, and a 3 centimeter square block. When you calculate the volume compared to the surface area, you get ratios. A 1 centimeter square block has a ratio of surface to area of 6:1. So there is 6 times more surface area per unit of volume. So for each unit of volume, there would be 6 units of surface area. And it continues to drop as you get larger. Okay? And that is one of the things that causes cells to divide. When they get so large, it gets very difficult for them to bring in all the supplies they need to stay alive and to get rid of all the waste products and manufactured products they need to do their job. So then they'll divide, undergo what is called mitosis, and become 2 cells. There's some things that are in common in all cells: DNA, RNA, ribosomes, proteins. Cells have these little things called organelles. Okay, and we're going to go through some pretty quickly here. Different cell types characterize life's 3 domains. All right, prokaryotes, which are either in domain archaea for the archaic bacteria, and bacteria for modern bacteria, they don't have a nucleus. They just have a little region where all the nuclear material stays. Eukaryotes have an official nucleus. Basically, there's a membrane around the DNA that keeps the DNA separate from the rest of the cell. Cell theory, 3 components. All organisms are made of 1 or more cells. The cell is the fundamental unit of life. All cells come from pre-existing cells. Different cell types characterize life's 3 different domains, and here is a chart. Prokaryotes, the archaic bacteria and the regular bacteria, don't have a nucleus. Eukaryotes do. That's the really big one. That's the one you really need to learn. Okay? Bacteria are prokaryotic. DNA is free in the cytoplasm. It's called basically a nucleoid area, just an area of the nucleus. Different antibiotics work on bacteria in many ways. Penicillin. Okay? Penicillin, when penicillin was invented, it was considered a miracle drug because it would cure rapidly previously diseases that caused death. And so this penicillin could nullify that. All right? And so what it does, how it actually works, penicillin stops the bacteria from reproducing. Okay? And the way they do that is they interfere with production of the cell wall in bacteria. So the cell wall doesn't form, the bacteria can't reproduce. And so then your immune system will catch up and be able to keep the bacteria from overwhelming your system. Here's the anatomy of a cell. We're going to look at an animal cell here. And these are all little organelles, or parts of the cell. And here is a plant cell. Now, the main difference you're going to see here is an animal cell has what we call a plasma membrane around it, okay, or a cell membrane. They are synonyms. Plant cells have both a plasma membrane and a cell wall. The cell wall adds extra strength and structure to a plant cell. Okay. A plant cell also has a vacuole, and it has chloroplasts. Chloroplasts basically take sunlight and convert it into chemical energy, which makes most plants autotrophic. And then this central vacuole has several little functions. We'll get to that in a minute. But these three things are the only differences between plant and animal cells. Plant cells actually have more things than animal cells. Now, a membrane surrounds each cell. This plasma membrane, and you find one in both plant and animal cells, is made up of what are called these phospholipid molecules. It has two regions. Hydrophilic head. Hydrophilic means water-loving, and hydrophobic tails. That means water-hating. And these things line up in water. When you put fats in water, they always have a hydrophilic head and a hydrophobic tail. And so you can take oil and put it in water, and it'll form these little spheres. Now, we will do that in one of our labs. You'll actually see that occur. We're going to put some food coloring inside some fat lipid cells that are just like this, and we'll dump them in the water, and then you'll see them force their way through the plasma membrane and slowly drip down. Here is a membrane cross-section showing some of the parts of a membrane. You have these little sugar molecules on the outside of the cell. These are attached to little proteins. The purpose of these different kind of sugar molecules is for identification. So you have an immune cell looking for a disease cell. Well, how does it tell your cells from the disease cells? Well, it's these little sugar molecules. These guys right here will signal to an immune system cell, hey, this is us, don't kill us. And so these immune cells will be able to bind to this sugar molecule and realize that, hey, this is a self cell. This cell is part of the organism we're protecting, so we're not going to destroy it. Then you'll see your little phospholipids and bilayer, because there's two layers. That puts a water-loving head on each side. And then these water or hydrophobic tails, these keep fluids from just diffusing in and out of the cell. It helps control it. Only fat-soluble stuff can diffuse across the plasma membrane. Water-soluble stuff can't. Now, how does it get in and out? It goes through these little transport proteins, and there's all different kinds of them, and we'll talk about a couple of them soon. But these little channel proteins or transport proteins allow things to go in and out, but it regulates it. Okay, it controls it, so not too much of anything goes in or out. You also have different little microfilaments down here. These are just structural elements. They basically link protein to protein and add extra strength to the plasma membrane of the cell. And then if you'll see these little bitty guys in here, those are actually cholesterol molecules. And cholesterol is incorporated into the plasma membrane to give structural rigidity. Eukaryotic cells contain organelles with specialized functions. You have the endomembrane system, okay? And it's got all around the outside here, it's got this nuclear envelope, and then it goes, it includes the Golgi apparatus, certain little lysosomes, vacuoles, and cell membranes. Okay, we will talk about each of these in turn. The nucleus contains your DNA. Now, inside the nucleus, where the DNA is, you will find a nucleolus. The nucleolus actually builds little structures called ribosomes, and we'll talk about ribosomes later on in Chapter 7. The nucleus and the endoplasmic reticulum interact with the Golgi apparatus to secrete substances. An example would be milk proteins. All right, here's our Golgi apparatus. right here. And basically you have this smooth endoplasmic reticulum making milk proteins. And so then they take the milk proteins and they put them in a little sac called a vacuole, and it is packaged here in the Golgi apparatus. So it sends the milk proteins to the Golgi apparatus. It puts it in a little transport vessel or vesicle so that it can move it, and then it will excrete it, or secrete it rather, out of the cell. Secretion is when we secrete a beneficial product. Excretion would be a waste product. A messenger molecule carries the protein recipe to a ribosome where the protein's assembled. The ribosomes basically exist out here in the plasma of the cell, okay, or the cytoplasm or cytosol. And so in the nucleus, little proteins are made that can make products. So cells make proteins, and the way they get the list of nucleoids or nucleic acids to assemble certain chemicals to make a protein comes from a thing called messenger RNA. Don't worry about that right now. We'll talk about that more in chapter 7. But what we do have is a ribosome. Just remember that a ribosome are little factories that make proteins. Okay? Now, there are free-floating proteins inside the cytosol of the cell, and then there are some that will attach themselves to a type of endoplasmic reticulum called the rough ER. And each of those make different kinds of proteins. You don't need to know what kind of proteins they make. You just need to know that a ribosome makes proteins. The rough ER is just a sac of a network of sacs, really, and it has ribosomes attached to it, which makes it different from this smooth endoplasmic reticulum, which doesn't have ribosomes attached to it. Smooth ER, no ribosomes. Rough ER has ribosomes attached to it. Vesicles. A vesicle is just packaging. You know, when you go buy a bag of potato chips, okay, the bag is the vesicle. If you buy a bottle of something, the bottle is the vesicle. It is just something to contain a product manufactured inside a cell. And that vesicle allows it to be moved from place to place inside the cell. Okay, the Golgi apparatus, basically it receives products that have been manufactured in the cell and packages them into vesicles. And those vesicles can move to another cell. They can just move out of the cell into ducts and go into the bloodstream. Or sometimes these products are just transported within the cell to another structure that's going to do something with them. Proteins leave the Golgi in vesicles, which fuse to go through a process called secretion, okay, or exocytosis. We'll cover those three terms here in a moment. Now, other vesicles leaving the Golgi carry digestive enzymes. There are these things called lysosomes. Lysosomes aid a cell in digestion. So where do the cells get the raw materials to manufacture the products? Well, they scoop them in from outside of the cell. They put them in a little vesicle, and then the lysosomes come up and dump digestive enzymes. The digestive enzymes will break up these raw materials and then incorporate them into new molecules. Okay? Lysosomes, cellular digestion, just breaks down the stuff that you need. The vacuole. Now, vacuoles help regulate the size and shape of a plant cell. It's mostly filled with water, but it also holds a few other things. A good example to see a vacuole in action. If the vacuole is full, the plant will look nice and perky, if you've ever had a house plant or a plant in your garden. Now, you take that plant and let it go to a drought. okay? And so the drought gets pretty harsh. And what you'll find is that the water will slowly move out of the plant in a process called respiration. And the water will leave the plant, and if it can't draw enough water out of the soil, the plant starts looking droopy. Okay, it's dehydrating. And so then you water your plant and you'll see it perk back up. Okay, that's because these vacuoles play an important structural role in plant. Peroxisomes. This is another kind of digestion, but what this does is it breaks down poisons and toxic substances. And it primarily does it in the liver. But let's say if you have one too many beer on an evening, understand alcohol is poison. Okay? And so you have these peroxisomes that take those alcohols and break them down into something that is no longer a toxin or a poison to your body. So a lot of people do have problems getting peroxisomes and lysosomes mixed up. So I would suggest you spend some time. Chloroplasts. These are organelles that use sunlight to produce food for the cell. The sunlight comes in and makes an energy molecules, and the energy molecule is used in another series of reactions to make glucose. Okay. Cytoskeleton, 3 types of fibers: microfilaments, very, very thin, intermediates, and microtubules. Microtubules, which are the largest here, make up things like cilia. There's a sperm cell. And then here we've got, that's a flagella. And then the cilia on the surface of an area. We can find in the human body, you'll find cilia in our trachea. But there are also single-celled organisms that have cilia, like paramecium. And they use them like little oars to move through the water. How do cells stick together? Well, organelles in a cell work together, so when you put them all together, they have some different little links. Here are some plant cells, and they have these special little cells called plasmodesmata. Plasmodesmata hooks these cells together and gives a channel from the inside of one cell to the inside of another cell. And so you can see these. So when you line all these guys up, and they're all attached in, say, a leaf, every cell in that leaf can move substances back and forth between any adjacent cell. In animal cells, right? In animal cells, we have something similar to a plasmodesmata. We call it a gap junction. Now, there's 3 kinds of junctions in animal cells. The gap junction looks like this, and basically every 2 cells or multiple cells have gap junctions between each other. Gap junctions are really important in muscle movements and your nervous system working. You got to have gap junctions for those. Tight junctions. These are like a series of little brads or staples that hold cells together. You find tight junctions in areas that have a lot of tension because they hold these things together, like skin cells have tight junctions, and it's very hard for things to diffuse through the skin between these little cells because the tight junctions kind of keep them sealed off. Anchoring junctions. These are intermediate filaments to hold cells together. These look like this, basically, and these are in areas where there's a lot of tendency for cells to be pulled apart. Okay? So they're very, very strong. Not all cells are equal. Here are muscle cells, nervous cells, plant cells. Here's the cell of an onion. Notice the onions don't have the green chloroplast because an onion is a root vegetable. Okay? Celery is a vegetative part of a vegetable. Okay? That's up above. So there are lots of different types of cells. We have just scratched the surface and hardly looked at it at all. And they all have different roles. Okay, they all do different things, and so not every cell has everything. Here is a list of terms that is pretty good that you're going to need to know from this chapter, and so this should help you tremendously. Make sure you know what all these terms mean. And that is the end of chapter 3.